all sorted. Brilliant. Hello everybody. It's nice to see you all again because we didn't do one of these in January, just because the beginning of yeah, I wasn't back at work until January the 6th, and it just felt like it was going to be all a bit of a mega rush, so I decided to take a break, concentrate on getting everything caught up, and then being able to come back and do February fresh. So that's what we're doing today. We're dyeing the colourway that will be released on well, no, it won't be the 1st of February because the 31st is the Friday, so it'll be the 3rd of February, because that'll be a Monday when I'm back at work. Yeah, and the winner that you guys chose over in the Fellowship of Yarn was this one, which I imaginatively called Frosted Rosemary. Colour names never been my strong point, but it's quite a nice one. It's sort of colour combination we've not really had very before. It's quite nice. It's got nice variations of darks and lights without me having to do much messing around to make sure we've got some contrast in tonal value. Blues and greens is always pretty popular. So yeah, so we're going to get cracking with that. Hopefully we're going to manage to create a palette that gives that same feeling of the picture. Any of you who have not been here with me doing these live streams before, I'm never aiming to dye the exact same colour match. I'm aiming to dye something on fibre that evokes the same feelings and evokes that same kind of theme as what there is on the screen, because every time you change a colour and put it on a different medium, it just has a look and has a slightly different feel. So we're going to get started. Those of you who have come and watched these with me a lot of the time before know that a lot of the time I'll either start at the dark point or the light point. The darkest one, oh, hang on. Let's go back to fibre pictures rather than dog pictures. The darkest one is going to be this colour here. So on the screens there, it's kind of looking a little bit black, but actually there's quite a lot of blue undertones going onto it, and even the tiniest hint of a green. It's kind of quite, indigo is the wrong word because it hasn't got quite, it's got more green in than an indigo, but it's that kind of feel. So we're going to start off with that colour and go from there. So I am actually going to start off with my green, and I'm going to go for this one, which is kind of a jadey green. That's going to hopefully give me that shift towards green that I'm really interested in. And now I want quite a lot of black. 1, 2, 3. So that's a really hefty dose of black. The blue dye that I have is quite strong, so in order to make it look like a really nice good navy, I often need to use, so actually, now looking at that, you know, I said I wanted some blue. I might not want blue. That might have already got to where I want it to go without adding more blue. Let's have a look. So when I'm testing colours out, this is just a piece of kitchen roll. Trying to judge colours just inside the jug like this is really hard. So the fibre is white, gives me an idea of what it is going to look like sat on there. Yeah, that does need some blue in it. It's more black than anything else, and I do definitely want blue. Right. So I've not added a vast amount of blue to that, because I can always add more, but I can't take it out once it's in there without starting again afresh. Let's have a look. Now I suspect on screens this isn't necessarily going to be particularly helpful, but can you see that was the original one when I just got the black and the jaded green in, and then I've just added a tiny little blue, but not masses. And when I'm kind of coming back over here, that's got to pretty much where I want it to get to. It's a tiny little bit of, it's very dark, there's undertones of blue, but it's not too indigo-y. There's a little bit of a hint of green verging into there as well. So that's our darkest colour. Okay, let's go for our lightest colour. So our lightest colour in this palette is this browny grey colour. I think in the original picture, I just inspiration when I was saying what the colours were. I think I described it as like maybe being mushroom. So it's that, is it grey, is it brown? It's sitting somewhere pretty squarely in the middle. So I'm going to need some of my brown dye. Really stiff. There we go. And although I say it's got grey, this grey has an awful lot of blue in it, and there's not actually any blue in there. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to have some black. My black has got purple undertones to it. So I'm going to use the black to make the brown more grey coloured, but not so grey as to be, it's still going to kind of read as brown. I think I've just explained that really badly. So, and I don't really need very much dye. It's always surprising how little dye that you need to make pale colours, particularly when I'm really focusing on trying to make sure they are properly pale colours. I want the contrast of having darks and lights, because when we start to try and use these in fibre, what we don't want is to have too much, the colours need to be different, but and the tonal values need to be different as well. Right, so that was 4 of brown and 1 of black. I'm going to add a little bit of water into it because I need to see what this is like as a pale colour. And I've intentionally not to put too much dye in there. I'm just going to make sure I've got no blue on the end of my testing fork. Let's have a look. Okay. So that's where we've ended up with. So, and both of those two are the same colour. I just did it twice because I think I've popped it on top of another blob of colour. Let me have a look. I'd like this to have a little bit more of a yellow tone to it. At the moment it's coming out, it's reading as a little bit too grey. Adding more brown isn't going to fix that. I'd just like to, warmer is the wrong word because warmer would imply we're going reds and oranges, but I think it needs to have more contrast with the greens and the blues that are in there. And because of that colour theory thing, opposite on the colour wheel is going to be, from blue is either yellow or orange. I'm going to shift it more to be more yellow because that's going to give me a better contrast. So I want this yellow, which is being a pain at the moment. I'm not wanting to stay in solution very well. Get back my finger. So this is my warm tone of yellow, and I'm just going to add the smallest amount I can, which is 1. Give it a good swirl around to make sure it's mixed up. Oh, that was a bigger drop than I was intending, but that's a bit more like it. So can you see how this was my original colour, those two down there. I've just added the tiniest little bit of yellow in there, and it's just made it a little bit warmer. It's possibly slightly yellower than it is in the original inspiration picture, but I'm okay with that for the reasons as I explained. Otherwise, if I want it to be more opposite on the colour wheel to the other shades that I've got going on. So let's dye the yellowy mustard shade next. So this is another colour that it's this one here. It's mostly yellow, and I'm not going to need masses of dye for doing this, otherwise it's going to be too dark. So I'm going to go for, let's say 10. Make sure I write that down. So I have to write it down because most of the time when I dye things, I don't dye to any specific recipes. I just keep sort of slowly. I have colour themes that I revisit quite often, but they will be different every time that I dye them. This I will re-dye for the entire month of February, so that it will always be available if anybody ever wants more. and that means I kind of need to know how much dye I've actually used. So I've got my daffodil, and I'm going to put a dose of brown in there. And again, I'm going to add my water in. Now, mixing these always often look very different when we come to put them on the fibre itself, and once they've been heat set, the yellow becomes a little bit more obvious. So I'm okay at the moment if it doesn't quite look yellow enough, because it will become more yellow. That's the shade we've come up with. So that was the pale colour there, and then this is one that we've just made a little bit darker, and it's a little bit more yellow. I think there's going to be enough contrast between those two, and I'm kind of happy with how it looks in the context of that colour palette. The only thing I am wondering whether to do is whether it needs anything to make it more reddy orange, but I don't think that's the direction I want to go in. So I'm going to leave that one as it is. Looking at that probably needs a little bit more water in to make it a bit paler. So again, how diluted they are is going to affect when I'm sort of swatching them like this, what they actually end up appearing of. They will be less intense, less dark than that once they go onto the fibre, and that dye has to spread out over the whole surface of the fibre. So that's our beigey mushroom colour, our very darkest bluey black, and our mustardy sort of shade. So that leaves me with my two shades on the very end, which is this blue and this green. Now again, I want to make sure these are different enough from one another. I also know I need to be really careful with my quantity of blue dye, that I don't end up using too much, because this blue dye can be an absolute, it's really dominant. So even though it's a mid-tone colour, I'm actually going to try and make sure I don't use too much of it. It feels like it's going to be a leaky syringe. Oh no, maybe not. So let's go 5 of you, and then I'm going to grab some of my grey. So if you remember when I was talking about making the brown, I said that the grey that I've got is actually very blue toned. So I'm going to use that together with this blue. Let's try 10. Okay, a bit of look around. See, even with all that, I think this is still going to be too dark a colour, and it's not got, this might be a start again colour. Let's have a look. Might need a fresh bit of kitchen roll. This one's not holding up very well. Ooh, that's not as bad as I thought actually. It's one of those, it looks really dark in the jug, but again, as soon as you put it on the white background, it's no longer quite so intimidatingly dark and scary. So that was me using blue, and then I've just toned it down from being really primary colour. So can you see how intense a blue that is? That's very much not the vibes going on in this picture. So I've just taken it down by using that grey toned blue to make it slightly less intense, and I think I'm okay with that one, which then leaves me with my green, which is next to it. And what I might do, because I find these two colours, those are going to be tonally very, very close to one another. So I'm possibly going to shift this slightly more into the green vibe, because actually if we look here, there is an awful lot of quite green going on. So I'm going to maybe move that petrol into being slightly less blue and slightly more green than it is in the original picture, because that's going to help make sure we've got enough contrast between these two colours. So let's go for a hefty chunk of that dye, which is kind of a murky olive green, and then let's start off with 5, and then I could add more if I need to. I think I'm going to need to add more to this. Make sure that's cleaned off. swirl it around a little bit. Okay, so that's where I am at the moment. It's this top colour here. So that is too green. I don't want something that green. So I'm going to give it another 5 of the grey. So I'm using my grey as kind of like as an alternative blue. So that's made it, so that was the original one. That's the one with a little bit more grey. So it's made it darker, it's made it more blue toned. I maybe do still want it to be slightly bluer than that. Turn grey. Right. I'm going to add this blue really cautiously, tiny little bit at a time. So we're going to start off just 1 milliliter of it and see how that shifts the colour. Let's have a bigger bit. There we go. So we've ended up with that colour. So that was our original shade. That was with more grey added, and then that's with me just adding the blue in. So if I take a look at it, have I got enough blue in there? I might go for 1 more of blue, but no more. I don't want it to be blue. I want it to be reading more as green with hints of blue. Let's make sure it's not any more than that. There we go. And hope I've not done too far. There we go. Yeah, that's the colour I want. Okay. Right, I needed to find a bigger bit of kitchen water. So that was our original one. That was the one with the added grey. That was the one with 1 bit of blue. That's the one with 2 bits of blue. But can you see how it's very definitely reading as a different colour to the pale blue that I have mixed up? Which is what I wanted. And it's also fractionally darker. There's more dye in this one. So we've kind of got it as being it's slightly different tonal value and it's slightly different in colour. Right, let me have a quick tidy up of things that are not going to be going onto fibre. That will need a little bit of water in it because we've not used that much dye in there. Everything else I think looks diluted enough. Let's move my notebook up onto there so I don't cover it with dye. Just give myself a clean bit of space to work. So we're now ready to start putting some dye onto fibre. So these are dyed in quite small quantities, sort of 1 at a time, and once the second batch I usually do scale up just to makes it a little bit quicker. It's a little bit less wasteful of cling film and all the other bits and pieces. But while I'm developing the colours, what I don't want to do is dye 500 grams of it all in one go and discover that it's not the right shade. So we start off small and then increase the quantities later on. So this was our darkest bluey blacky colour. Going on. So, and we're just spreading it evenly throughout the fibre. There's always little bits of colour variation in these because they are hand dyed, but we try to get them as even as possible, making sure there's no really obvious white bits going on. Particularly like right where the ends fold over. But I think that's spread out pretty evenly. It's pretty easy with the nice dark colours because there's lots of dye to go around. It's a little bit harder with the pale colours. Then we're going to add our citric acid. So citric acid is basically it's lemon juice, and it just makes the conditions of the fibre acidic, which helps the dye form the bonds onto the wool in a permanent basis, well, semi-permanent, because we all know from washing our clothes they do fade no matter what you do with them. And the blue dye molecules are particularly, they're a bit of a pain. They don't form the most stable of bonds. The blue dye molecules are the largest dye molecules, and they are more unstable in the bonds that they make with the fibre. So they're more prone to being basically knocked off by general life events. So just you spinning them, rubbing with your fingers. Dyes get graded according to their fastness, is the technical term, and that refers to how light fast they are. How wash fast they are, and also how rub proof, how resistant they are to being to abrasiveness. It's the same reason as why you're told when you buy a pair of brand new dark blue denim jeans, it does advise, usually somewhere on the label, there's a thing that says, do not sit on light coloured upholstery until after you have washed this. And it's because basically as you sit there and you sort of gently fidget about the place, the dye molecules will just rub off. And it's particularly true with really dark saturated blues. So, and the same thing happens when you're spinning. The act of your hands rubbing those blue dye molecules just knocks some of them off that have not made the most stable bonds. And it's not necessarily that anything's gone wrong in the dyeing process, it's just the chemical nature of dyes and how they attach onto textiles. So obviously you do everything you can to make sure that there aren't loose dye molecules, but particularly with fibre, there's a lot of surface area there and your hands are rubbing all over it quite tightly. So there we go. So this was our palest colour. This is this browny mushroomy colour. Make sure that's all got evenly distributed. Tuck the ends in and roll it up nice and tight. So this is the low water dyeing method, so it gets minimal agitation of the fibre, which means it's nice to spin when you come to use it. And next colour. So I've had a bit of a day of morning of contrast because I've been dyeing fibre all morning before we started this live. I'm dyeing a big batch of Spark Pleasant silk, which is the very, very black base with just streaks of white silk running through it. It looks beautiful once you spin it up. It has a real sort of glow to it. But I tend to have to, in order to look effective, it needs quite bright, saturated colours going on. Not these sorts of shades, otherwise it just all looks a little bit, it's quite dull, quite sort of boring, whereas if you dye it in really nice bright colours, you end up almost with this sort of stained glass kind of effect. It feels like there's light coming from within the fibre. So yeah, so I had to come in and switch my head from dyeing super bright intense colours to these more muted type shades. So this is our mustardy yellow type colour. I'm quite pleased with that. Fingers crossed the yellow dye does what I think it's going to do and it doesn't come out too yellow looking. And that's the nice thing about, if need be, if this comes out when I sort of heat set it and dry it and I look at it and I don't like it, because I've not kind of dyed this the day before the start of February, if need be, I've got a chance to go back and tweak a recipe and just dye something that's a little bit of a better colour fit. Doesn't happen often, but does sometimes. Let's wrap that one up. So that's our yellow. So next we've got the pale blue and then the pale green blue. And then one of the other things I have got to do today is I've got another batch of Cambrian that needs to be done, because the Mine colourway, which is one of the regular always available shades, that pack has sold out again, so I need to dye some more of that one to get that relisted. And the blue. So, and then I am off out later and teaching my puppy classes, in my slightly randomly arrived at second career of becoming a dog trainer. So I've got puppy classes happening tonight, and it's quite a nice one because it's the one where we get all the different surfaces out and things for them to explore. We get to watch them being brave and having a nice time, sort of walking over different things, seeing things that are different shapes, different sounds. So it's always a nice session to go and have a go at, watch, and to sort of show puppy guardians everything that's going on in their dogs' heads. So that's our pale blue. So as you can see, hopefully I've not made this too dark, but you can see how strong a dye that blue is. You have to be really careful that I don't end up with something that is just sort of very primary colour blue rather than this more grey shade that we were after. Let's tuck that one up. Okay, and then final one is going to be this greeny shade that we were doing. So this is last colour, and then these will go into the oven to be heat set. So basically until there's no loose dye molecules, everything's made a bond with the fibre. Then it all gets to cool down. Then it all gets a hot wash with detergent. That's fun. That's coming out, that's looking more green than it was on the little swatch. But we'll see. I think I quite like it still, even though it's not quite as blue as it was in the original picture. But yeah, and then once they've all had hot washed with detergent, they get the detergent rinsed out of them. Then they're all hung up to dry. Once they've all been hung up to dry, everything gets weighed out and divided up and put into all the packaging. I need to take some photos of it so that you can actually see what it's like as dried fibre. Okay. And then somebody has asked a question on Instagram and I can't see it. Oh, hang on. So someone said on Instagram, do the colours tend to end up darker or lighter after heat fixing? The heat fixing doesn't necessarily change the colour. What changes the colour appearance is whether the fibre is wet or dry. So these will all look darker now than they will when they're on dried wool. So just at the moment, there's lots of colour being reflected off them due to them being wet. And then as they dry, they get lighter in appearance. So at the moment they look darker than they will actually be. This one in particular I would expect will be quite a little bit lighter. So let's have a look at these compared to our picture. That one, that one, that one, that one, and that one. So that is what we've ended up with. So that's in the same order as they are in the inspiration picture. This one I have made greener than in the original picture, just because I want to make sure we've got enough contrast going on with that blue. But apart from that, I've not fiddled about too much with these. This yellow is possibly slightly warmer in the original picture, but not by masses, and I think sits quite nicely in the colour palette, but we'll wait and see. I'll put them in the oven, we'll heat set them, we'll see what comes out, see whether I make any changes to any of them and re-dye anything. But I'm liking the feel of those, and they feel like a colour palette that I would enjoy spinning and that would work well in a project of various sorts. So people do all sorts of things with these. Some people just spin them all up into mini skeins and just keep that. They've got a whole palette of them that they use for colour work. Some people take the pack each month and card them together. Some people take the pack and just spin them end to end, and then are doing like long-term big crochet blankets and projects with them. But the nice thing, because they're dyed on Cambrian, is I've always got Cambrian wool, or nearly always got some Cambrian wool of some sort in the shop, and I do also sell it undyed, so you kind of have got options to go with it. So we shall leave it there for this month. I shall see you all at the end of February, when we will come back and we'll be dyeing our colourway for March. Hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I shall speak to you all again soon.